Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Kim Daniels, and I'm newly on board here as the Associate Director of Georgetown's Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life. We want to thank you all for joining us and participating in this critical conversation on the central issue facing Catholics today, the clerical sexual abuse crisis. These past months, American Catholics have been devastated and angered by revelations regarding sexual abuse and abuse of power in the Church, beginning with Cardinal McCarrick's awful predation as he was protected by a culture of clericalism, moving on to the release of the Pennsylvania grand jury report and its horrific accounting of decades of sexual abuse and cover-up, which raised in its wake reports of so many other instances when church leaders failed in their most basic duty to protect the vulnerable, in the process drastically undermining trust in our leaders, as well as our witness to the gospel. We gather today to ask how lay women and men can lead the response to this crisis, helping forge a path forward that will protect children and vulnerable adults, secure justice and healing for survivors, provide real accountability for bishops, and reform the clerical culture so that abuse and its cover-up can never happen again. We also seek to discuss how Catholic principles can root our efforts, helping us come together to assess the damage, rebuild institutional integrity, and confront the truth about abuse and misconduct so that we can renew our church and fully live out our mission to love and serve God and our neighbors. As we consider such questions tonight, we'd like to begin by thanking our campus partners and co-sponsors, the Office of Mission and Ministry, led by Vice President for Mission and Ministry, Father Mark Bosco, the Berkley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, led by Director Sean Casey, and a special thanks to our colleagues in the Office of Global Engagement, led by Vice President for Global Engagement, Tom Manchoff. We're honored to have such an impressive panel here tonight, including Robert Bennett, Kevin Burns, Dr. Dawn Eden Goldstein, and Karen Tumulty, and we look forward to getting their thoughtful perspectives. John Carr, the director of the initiative, will moderate the discussion and offer his own reflections as well. I'd like to take this opportunity to say that after many years as a friend and ally, I'm thrilled to be on board here working with and learning from John. His 4 decades of service to the Church are a true example of what faithful, responsible lay leadership looks like. Along with his colleagues here at Georgetown, John has built something remarkable with this initiative, which this fall marks a key milestone as it reaches its 5th year of offering a respected forum for principled dialogue on issues at the intersection of Catholicism and public life, building bridges across political, religious, and ideological boundaries, working to advance the message of Pope Francis, and encouraging lay leaders to work in unity and charity for mission. Over these 5 years, the initiative has welcomed some 18,000 people to gatherings just like this one, bringing leaders together to help think through the most challenging questions facing us in these challenging times. It's hosted dozens of remarkable gatherings during the last 5 years. As on so many other nights, the turnout tonight is remarkable and demonstrates the commitment that Catholic lay people have to moving forward together in responding to this critical issue. Just last week, we hosted our first event of the year, a Salt and Light gathering for young Catholic leaders, also focused on the abuse crisis. And there, too, we had a full house and a powerful and lively discussion that showed the faith, energy, and sense of mission that young people bring to the table. Tonight, you're welcome to come to the table and join the discussion on Twitter at GUSCST Public Life using the hashtag Confronting the Crisis. Many thanks to you all and to our panelists. And John, thank you for your perspective on this issue, grounded in your years of service to the Church.
Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. It's great to see you all. It's great to have Kim here in her new role as Associate Director of the initiative. It was almost exactly 5 years ago that Kim was part of our inaugural dialogue on the Francis factor. It was Kim, it was Mark Shields, who's here in the front row, David Brooks, and Alexia Kelly. I don't know if Alexia is here, but since then we've had more than 30 of these. More than 15,000 of you have come, and it's been remarkable to see the hunger for civil and substantive dialogue. So Kim's brings so much: academic credentials, relationships knowledge, and it's going to be a great partner. While this is Kim's first dialogue as in this new role, I want you to join me in thanking Monica Finnegan. This is her last dialogue as our program manager. She has done so much of the work that is in our new annual report. I'm sure you've read it cover to cover while you were waiting for us. But our dialogues, our Dahlgren dialogues, our convening, and Monica is simultaneously working for us and going to the business school, and got an offer from PricewaterhouseCoopers. And I'm just stunned. She thought maybe that might be a better step forward for her career. For those of you who may be interested, the job is posted. What could be more fun than working with Kim and I? So if you're interested, I encourage you to join the conversation on Twitter at GUCST Public Life using the hashtag Confronting Crisis. Rather than offer opening, I'm going to take some time after our panel to share some of my experiences working with the church for forever, it seems, and how this topic has haunted, in some ways, that service. But I'm very pleased by who we have here to talk about this. This is not your typical panel, and that we're not just going to look at who did what to whom and why, and all that. We're going to look at this through two lenses. One is, how does Catholic social thought provide some principles, some values, a way of looking at this, and could it offer some criteria, some directions for action? And secondly, it was Bishop Wensky who said today, it was his experience that Catholics still believe in God, they just don't believe in us. And if the hierarchy is going to be compromised, they have some steps to take, but so do lay leaders to step up and exercise their role. And so we're going to talk about that. About an hour ago, this came from the Washington Post, that the Maryland Attorney General is going to investigate sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. So sadly, this is timely and relevant. Here's how we're going to divide up the time. We just said hello. I'm going to introduce the panel and ask them some questions. At the end of that, I'm going to offer some reflections, and then we're going to turn to you for some questions, and then we'll come back to the panel for some closing comments. And we have a remarkable panel. We have Bob Bennett, distinguished attorney, was on the review board for the bishops. Karen, who's an outstanding journalist, now a commentator. She's our person in the pew for tonight. Dawn is a theologian. We'll talk more about that. And Kevin is a dear friend of mine who has a unique perspective on this. So that's how we're going to use our time, and I'm going to start with Kevin. Kevin is an attorney and former prosecutor. He comes from the Boston area. He attended Xavier Brothers High School, parochial schools, as a graduate of the Columbus School of Law at Catholic University. He was a Navy judge advocate. He was a prosecuting attorney, and now he's in private practice doing civil rights and employment law. But Kevin is not here for any of those reasons, or not primarily for any of those reasons. I was with a group of men, and we were having breakfast, and we were talking about the sex abuse crisis, and we were all holding forth at some length. And Kevin said, you know what's missing from this conversation is the voice of people who've actually experienced this, survivors, victims. And we all went, And then he said something quite remarkable. He said, actually, I've had that experience. And so I invited Kevin to come and be with us to talk about what happened to him, its impact on his faith, his family, he's a father, and how that should help the rest of us understand what's going on. So Kevin, thank you for being here.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Would you like me to speak? My, my role on this panel is a little unique. My qualification is that when I was 8 years old, I was repeatedly sexually molested by a Catholic priest. When I told my parents about it, my mother beat me with a strap. And for 4 decades, I hid that fact. I want to tell you, I feel a little odd because I guess I speak for myself, and every day in the headlines I see more of this for tens of thousands of young boys and girls who have had their lives shattered by the imposition of sex by somebody against their will. I learned early on that neither my parents nor the church that I had been raised in would protect me, but the worst lesson was the fundamental feeling my entire life that I was damaged goods, that there was a God and he didn't like me very much, because I was raised in a faith that said that bad things happen to bad people. And the 8-year-old mind says, you must have been bad, you must have done something, and you're not to talk about this. And so the impact on my life was I took those feelings and put them inside. And I became very angry as a teenager and as an adult. And I lashed out at the world. And I had difficulties with relationships and difficulties in work. And it ended in me being in a hospital tied to a gurney, being fed charcoal to get the things out of my system that I had tried to take my life with. That's what abuse really does. It took away my sense of dignity, my sense of safety, my sense of a belief in a loving God. I don't know if I can do justice to the feelings that I've had. It led to addiction, to drugs, alcohol, any substance that would change the way I felt, and I also lived 2 lives. There was me out front, and then there was the hidden me, and depression, and all those things happened. I chose people that were damaged like me for mates. I engaged in behaviors that convinced me that I was fundamentally worthless. But the relationship was complicated by the fact that when I was in high school, the brothers of Severian and St. Francis Xavier took an interest in me and gave me an education and saw something. And it wasn't lost on me that I was abused by a father. When you're abused in this faith, it's a form of spiritual incest. You lose your moorings and you forget who you are. And the brothers restored a little bit of that. And it wasn't lost on me that while the father was abusive, the brothers were not. I don't know. I'm not here to give you solutions or tell you about politics or describe for you what made who do what. I just know that my life was irretrievably changed for the worse. And I could never, ever, ever feel again safe. I've had $150,000 of therapy, 16 years of recovery, and still, sitting here in front of you all, there's this sense that the reason I'm on this panel is because I'm the broken one. I'm just not sure I can convey to you of what a horrible experience it is to wake up in the middle of the night thinking one thought and one thought only from the Bible. My God, why have you forsaken me? That's all I have, John.
Thank you, Kevin, for powerful witness in helping us understand some of the pain and some of the anguish. Maybe we should just go home. That was overwhelming. Survivors and victims and their families are not the only ones hurt by this. In some ways, the whole church is hurt by this. One of the things we've been talking about is the church's capacity to do good, to stand up for what's right, is diminished by this. Its credibility is damaged. And when I was thinking about all this, and I was on my iPad watching the Nationals lose, that seemed to happen a lot this summer, a thing came up, and it said, "Why am I still a Catholic?" And I thought, oh, here we go. And it turned out to be a column by Karen Tumulty, who I know Karen as a distinguished political reporter, worked for the LA Times, Time Magazine, the Washington Post, now an opinion columnist. And this was her conversation with herself and with me and others who read this from the second pew at Blessed Sacrament Parish. So while the rest of us don't share the bitter pain and anguish and damage that Kevin's talked about, we have been damaged. Our church is broken in some ways. Can you share with us some of what you experienced in the second pew, and as somebody who knows big institutions, what we should be thinking about?
Sure. Well, first of all, Kevin, I am so sorry for what happened to you, and I am so grateful that you can speak about it, because it really wasn't until people could speak about it that the rest of us could really understand how badly broken the church is. And the fact that we're here again after we were here in 2002 and after we were here in the 1990s, and we are here over and over and over again, and the horrific numbers and stories that we saw come out of Pennsylvania, and this is just the beginning. There are now 12 to 15 states that are looking at launching these kinds of investigations. So we are going to have to go through this again and again and again. And I still don't really have the answer to why I'm still a Catholic. I know that it's part of my identity. I know that going to church has been a source of peace and strength my whole life, but I still haven't quite gotten to this. And a couple of weeks ago, and Mark was there, we had a sort of town hall at Blessed Sacrament, and I was surprised. Several hundred people showed up, and the amount of anger in that room was extraordinary. But it also struck me that, there was a lot of lip service given to empowering the laity. I'm not sure that the church leadership is really going to do that, because that means giving up power, which seems to be a very difficult thing for them to do. I think that, talking to us about Catholic social teaching and, canon law and all these other things, it's a conversation that I think most lay people, they don't want to hear about canon law until we feel that the church is doing the first thing, which is dealing with the kind of law that puts people in jail. And second of all, I just think the church, until they are ready to open up their records to somebody who is independent, and I understand that there's, there will be lots of false accusations in there, so I'm not saying make it all public, but even in Pennsylvania, the report is full of redactions because of the church. And until the church is willing to let a neutral party go in and look at whatever horror is in those records, I just don't think they're serious about this either. So I'm still wondering why I'm still a Catholic. And you know, I'm also wondering, my children are grown, but they don't want to go to church. I'm not sure if they were younger, how comfortable I would feel, you know, having them participate at church. I mean, I'm just not sure yet that the leadership of the church is ready to, first of all, share power with the laity as much as they give lip service to that. And, you know, second of all, really themselves confront the damage that they have done to our church.
Karen, as I reread the piece last night, two things struck me. One is you talked about what was in the bulletin. And being a great journalist, you found an eloquent way to say it wasn't very helpful. And then you talked about whoever preached that day and what he said and what the response was. Can you say
Sure.
a little bit about the different responses of the church?
So I got to church, and the first thing I did was grab the bulletin, and I was reading it, and there was, the pastor wrote his letter about how we're all suffering through this. And by the way, if you don't contribute to the church, you're only going to hurt your local parish, not the archdiocese, so please keep those checks coming. So at the moment, my posture is to go to Mass, and I turn in an empty envelope so they know I'm there and that there's nothing in that envelope until I'm a little more comfortable with that. And even now, the bulletin is all about compromise and acceptance, and I don't want to compromise, I don't want to accept. But we have an extraordinary young priest at our church, Father Alec, and he got up, and the first thing he did was shared his own doubts. And it was the best thing he could have done. He said, I actually wonder, why did I pick this life? And then he made an appeal. He said, if everybody doesn't stay here, we're not going to fix this, because fixing it is going to have to come from the pews. Again, I'm not quite sure they've come to that. I think that is there. That is why I'm still there, but it is also, you know, why I'm still skeptical.
Bob, Karen said, why are we here again? Most people here know you as a very distinguished, famous lawyer, former prosecutor, defense attorney. You've represented a president, a couple defense secretaries, some senators, a mayor, journalists. They maybe know you're from Brooklyn, or at least they will after you talk. You're a product of Jesuit education, Brooklyn Prep, Georgetown, Georgetown Law, and a school up north called Harvard. But what they may not know is you were a part of the original National Review Board for the Protection of Children and Young People, created early in this century, and you served, I think, 2002 to 2004. And when we were thinking about this panel, this conversation, we were thinking, let's find somebody who went through that experience and see if you can help us understand what was learned, what was done right, what was done wrong, and why, in Karen's words, are we still here?
Well, I must tell you, I was put on this National Review Board along with the finest group of board members I have ever been on any board with. People like Leon Panetta, Dr. Paul McHugh, who at the time was the head of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins, Justice Ann Burke, the Illinois Supreme Court, and several others. And when we started, we didn't know what we would find. is the press overstating it? Are these exaggerations? And I can tell you, having done the investigation primarily, because I was with a big firm and we had the resources to do it, every single one of us is totally depressed about it, and we're shocked by it. The press didn't overstate it. If anything, they understated it. This was rampant. It was absolutely rampant. And I think one of the biggest shocks I had is I thought that a priest who molested a child would be racked with guilt because of the inconsistency of what they're doing and who they are supposed to be. But that wasn't true. They were not racked with guilt. Not at all. And Paul McHugh, I remember, the head of psychiatry at Hopkins, said, "Oh, Bob, you're naive." He said, "I've treated a lot of these guys." He said, they don't feel guilty at all. They feel they've done a favor to the child. And I said, what's going on here? It was a shocking experience for me. I was very depressed. Certainly not anything like my friend at the other end, but it was just awful. And why? It's the bishops. It's the bishops. It's a very selective men's club, mostly all white, mostly old. They resist change. They have some sort of an inherent dislike for women, except for the Blessed Mother, maybe. They resist change. And you mentioned about this wonderful priest. And we all know wonderful priests. There are many of them. I'll guarantee you one thing, they'll never become bishops, because the bishops make other bishops out of their own, the way they are. And until the laity takes on the hierarchy, there's never, ever going to be a change. And what I found was an attitude on the part of the bishops of, well, look, we've been around 2,000 years, and this too will pass. Let me give you just one little vignette that to me says so much. The chair of our board was the governor of Oklahoma, Frank Keating. And then he left and went into private practice in the insurance business. And the board, the remaining board, asked Ann Burke, Judge Burke, to take on and be the chair. And she was the most effective member and really did most of Keating's work, to be candid with you. And do you know we couldn't get her to be named the chair? And Bishop Gregory said, you know, I can get this through if we call her an acting chair. Well, it's a simple little thing, but it really isn't. It really tells you a story. Tells you what's really going on in their minds. And I think what we have to do is realize that we are the church. They're not the church. We are the church. And I don't know to what extent we're going to get into the issues, but I must tell you, I did a complete reversal after dealing with this problem for several years. I believe celibacy should be voluntary. I believe that women should be able to be priests. and priests should be able to marry. And these things are not doctrinal. These things can be changed, but they will never, ever be changed by the little boys club that works at the Vatican. Now, I'm going to get excommunicated or something, but I owe you my honesty, and that's, after working on this stuff for years, that's how I feel.
And you could take some of us with you. Just a couple things. I'm going to tell a story later. There are a couple good bishops, too, and they're up against it as well. Dawn, you are bringing a lot of different perspectives to this. You come without some of the history, some would say the baggage of a cradle Catholic. You grew up in a Jewish home. I'm told you were an agnostic and an evangelical, and then joined a church that was mired in scandal. You have been a rock music historian and a headline writer for the New York Post. You wrote several books under the pen name Dawn Eden. One of the great names of a book I've ever heard is The Thrill of the Chaste. I'm just going to move on. But the one thing I learned about that was you wrote that book, good part of that book, over at the center over here, overlooking the Jesuit cemetery.
That's right.
You may be the only rock music historian who has a degree in theology from the Dominican House of Studies. You're the first woman to earn a doctorate in sacred theology. We should clap for that, too. It was from the University of St. Mary of the Lake, and now you're an assistant professor at Holy Apostles College and Seminary, so we're glad you're at a seminary. 6 years ago, you came forward as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse with the publication of My Peace I Give You, Healing Sexual Wounds with the Help of the Saints. When you speak on this topic, Fred, my question is, what's a nice Jewish girl like you doing in the middle of a conversation like this? Why, I saw in your blog, why would someone who was abused join a church fighting the scourge of abuse? And maybe even more importantly, what is it in our theology, in our heritage, that gives us the resources to fight against this evil?
Well, thank you. Those are some complex questions. Just a minor correction. There have been other women who were doctors of sacred theology, but I was the first one to earn that degree from Mundelein, which is to say the first one since they started awarding those degrees back in the 1930s, which does say something about our church's failure to support lay people who wish to have the type of degrees that would enable them to teach at seminaries. Even though the Second Vatican Council, speaking about Catholic social teaching, even though the Second Vatican Council did want laity to be involved in seminary formation, it wasn't until 1979, I believe, when John Paul II actually opened the pontifical universities to laity. And the pontifical degrees, or canonical degrees as they're officially known, are the degrees that are required if one is to teach theology on the seminary level, and so form seminarians. And to this day, with the exception of the Catholic University of America, which has a limited amount of support, scholarship funding for lay people who want to get canonical degrees, I don't know of any pontifical university in the United States that has a stable scholarship program for laity wishing to get those degrees. I know the Dominican House of Studies just instituted occasional scholarships. But what this means is that if you're a layperson and you feel that the Lord is calling you to teach on the seminary level and to form seminarians, and here's Pope Francis saying, yes, we need more women in seminaries. Cardinal Willay just said that as well. And also, we need more laymen. So, on the one hand, the church is calling for this, and on the other hand, the church is not coming up with funding structures so that laity don't have to pay their own way. That's why I'm the first.
Well, moving beyond that, you have made a choice to join a community that is inflicting the kind of pain you experienced as a child, and have tried to say in your book that there are resources within our faith to deal with that pain. Could you say more about that?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking me about that. And I know it may seem very strange to people to think that an abuse victim, even after the scandals, would come in. My experience was fundamentally different from Kevin's in that way. The first abuse that I suffered at the age of 5 did take place in a house of worship, but it was in a Jewish house of worship. It was committed by a janitor there. And when I told my mother about it, I was afraid to tell my father because I thought that it was somehow my fault. My parents were separated at the time. My mother went to the rabbi, and the rabbi called in the janitor, and it was the janitor's word against mine. And so I know what it's like to have one's experience denied, but that was outside the church. Now, in 2002, when the scandals hit, by then I had become a fairly new Christian, but in a non-denominational evangelical, and I was just determined I was going to be ABC, anything but Catholic. And I was at a reading group for G.K. Chesterton, Memo to Self: if one does not want to be talked into becoming Catholic, do not go to a G.K. Chesterton reading group. But I was reading the headlines, including about the lay board and the findings. And I also was reading in those stories in the Washington Post. I was in New York, so it was mostly the New York Times. I was reading quotations from people like Father Groeschel and Bill Donahue of the Catholic League, saying, as we just heard from Bob, this line that was going out, that Bob had heard as well, that this is just something fomented by the media, or trumped up by the media, that it's all exaggerated. So sitting there with this Chesterton reading group, I said to the fellow members of the group, now I know you all just think that that there aren't really priests abusing and it's just the media. And they said, no, what would make you think that we believe that? We are extremely concerned about abuse. And then what they really put across to me was the view from the second pew, as Karen was saying. That's the view that I got from ordinary Catholics, that they were furious that this was happening in their church and that they wanted reform. And then after that, I began to study Catholic social teaching. I began to study what the Catholic Church teaches about human dignity and human freedom and about the right to life of every human being from conception until death. And what I realized was that if every human being on earth believed and practiced what the Catholic Church teaches about human dignity, I wouldn't have suffered abuse. No one would have suffered abuse. And it's true, it's true. And so I realized that in that case, I had to go where the truth was. Even if there was this structure of bishops and structure of secrecy and structure of cover-ups that angled against the church actually practicing what it believes, still, I had to be part of the church, because only then, on the inside, also believing that the Catholic Church is the church founded by Jesus Christ. That was certainly important too. But only on the inside, with that faith and strengthened by the sacraments, could I actually be part of the solution.
Bob, do you have a comment?
No, I just, you know, one of the things that really troubles me recently and has me really down is the situation of Father McCarrick, Cardinal McCarrick. The Cardinal and I were very, very good friends. We lunched together often and talked. And I wrote a book, and I'm not mentioning this to sell the book, but you can get it on Amazon if you want.
What's the name of the book, Bob?
The name of the book is In the Ring, The Trials of a Washington Lawyer. And I have a chapter on the scandal, and I kind of wanted to balance it a little bit. So this is what I said about my great friend, Cardinal McCarrick. Theodore Cardinal McCarrick, the former Archbishop of Washington, is a great and humble man of the church. He never allowed the high office he held and the perks that go with it to cause him to forget that he is a priest and pastor to his flock. And I learned that wasn't right, that he was sleeping with seminarians, and there are one or two instances. And I can't tell you how betrayed I felt and what that revealed, because what that revealed, and this is one of the immediate things a lay board has to look into, is how can someone get so high in the church to be a cardinal when it was well known, we now know that it was well known, that he was sleeping with seminarians and doing these other things. That shows you the indifference of the hierarchy. They don't really see anything wrong with it. During my investigation, I had one priest tell me that he felt celibacy meant you didn't sleep with a woman. So,
well,
anyway, thank you for letting me.
I think we've done a good job so far articulating the enormous pain and anguish that we feel and the anger. Our little initiative here is about two things. One is about laity and lay leadership, and the other is about these principles that Dawn talked about. What are the ways in which lay people in the middle of a broken church can exercise leadership that makes a difference? How do we stand with Kevin and the many, many people who have experienced with Kevin? How do we insist on change? What are the ways in which that can work? Dawn, you study theology. What are the resources in our church that can help us move from our anger, which is profound, to reform and renewal?
Well, I think that we could learn something from other movements that have promoted equality and justice, and that is the value of witness. When I wrote my book, which is under there somewhere,
What is the name of the book?
My Peace I Give You, Healing Sexual Wounds with the Help of the Saints.
That's not as good as The Thrill of the
No,
Chase.
no, I'm afraid it's not. No, and the subtitle of The Thrill of the Chaste, which is Finding Fulfillment While Keeping Your Clothes On. Yes. But when I wrote my...
That's a story about Washington, not the church. We'll ask Karen about that.
The Thrill of the Chase?
That sell a lot of copies?
About 24,000 thus far in a couple of editions, but who's counting?
Okay, so what do we got in addition to your book that helps us move from anger to action?
Well, what I'm saying with respect to witness is that I realized that if I wanted to help people heal, I could do something that priests and bishops couldn't do, which is that I could tell my story and speak from the perspective of a survivor. And so I think that it would be good, to keep in mind what Paul VI said in Evangelii Nunciandi, that the world does not listen to teachers as much as it will listen to witnesses, and if it will listen to teachers, it's because they are witnesses. So I think that what Kevin is doing is extremely important. I think that what other survivors of clergy abuse are doing is extremely important. I think that the more people who speak up about their experience, and also if they're doing outreach to fellow victims about their healing as well, that will certainly help us to move forward. We need our Me Too movement. I was very happy to see recently that there's been talk of a Me Too movement for seminarians. We need that very badly, and I speak as one who teaches in seminaries and who has had a seminarian come to me. And this was not at the place where I currently teach, but a seminarian came to me and said that he had been bullied by some other seminarians, sexually bullied. And he said that he believed there should be an anti-bullying policy. And I went to the vice rector, and the vice rector said, we don't need an anti-bullying policy. We're Christians. People are expected to act Christian here. And I thought, we have an anti-plagiarism policy, and plagiarism isn't Christian. We can't have any recourse for students who are bullied. That's why I was very happy to hear, although I don't necessarily support every one of the U.S. bishops' proposals for dealing with the crisis, I was glad that they picked up the proposal of Father Thomas Berg, who wrote an excellent book called Hurting in the Church, about recovering from crisis. The U.S. bishops took Father Berg's proposal that there be a national hotline for those who have suffered abuse by clergy, including for seminarians.
But who's on the other end of that hotline? Because
lay people. Lay people. They did say.
And where does the lay person take it? Because if it's to the church, that doesn't get you there. If it's, to 911, it does.
Well, the thing is, 911 often won't always respond to adults saying that they've had unwanted advances from an adult. I mean, I understand, I completely agree that we need to first deal with the law that puts people in jail, but with some of the seminary abuse, it's an abuse of power.
Kevin? Yeah. I remember you telling me a story how you moved from anger to action, where you actually wanted to tell someone in the church what had happened to you and what it meant to you.
Yeah, I apologize for making a joke. I use that as a device when things are intense. And there's a couple of, before I get to that, there's just a couple of things I want to say. First of all, the idea of witnessing and validating abuse is important. And much of the discussion that I hear is from the top down. We need to tell priests and others. My idea is that every church in this country set aside a mass where a victim stands up and tells their story. At John's, actually, request, he set up a meeting with a priest here who was also a teacher who was slightly unusual. I walked into his office and he sweared like a stevedore, and I thought, well, I can at least talk to this guy. And I spent 2 hours with him. It was really a one-way conversation where I started with the sins of Constantine, worked through the Middle Ages, up through the Concordat with Hitler, through the abuse scandal, through the mistreatment of this, that, the other thing. And then I talked about I had to lead up to that to get to my abuse. And he said one thing that I try to work with, I'm imperfect at it. He said, Kevin, every day you stay enraged is another day that man abuses you. So you make a choice. You are taking on his pain, his sins, and his depravity. So do you want to be angry, or do you want to get better? He didn't talk to me about coming back to the church or going to mass or lighting candles or anything like that. He just said this.
That's what the rest of us do.
Yeah, there's just one last thing I want to say, because I think from my perspective, you talk about the faith. And again, I want us to understand that in Catholicism, we call our priests fathers. Any father that will not protect his children or will abuse him has no right to bear a collar.
I thought that this conversation, I didn't think it would be this intense or powerful, but I thought it might get us to a place where we were looking for some ways forward. And I tried to think, normally at these gatherings, I ask questions, I don't make comments, but I wanted to try and come up with some lessons that I think could guide us forward. And I want to share a few experiences and a couple lessons, and then we'll turn it over to questions. For me, the clerical sexual abuse scandal is personal, professional, and institutional. For 50 years, it has haunted my work. In the 80s, I worked for Cardinal Hickey, and he called me to his house and told me that a priest had abused a number of young people. And the clerics in the room said they knew the priests, and they said, well, this was impossible. This was an unfair attack. And I said, Cardinal Hickey had his canon lawyer and a civil lawyer review this, and they said this happened. I said the priest has to be removed, and he removed the priest. And the lesson I drew from that is there are not enough parents in the room. Priests see this through the eyes of their brother priests. For a parent, this is the worst thing that can happen short of the loss of a child. It affects faith in Eucharist, it affects authority and family, it affects everything, sexuality, Eucharist, priesthood. I also heard lawyers tell Cardinal Hickey that he should not reach out to victims or their families. He shouldn't apologize, and that they would have confidential settlements that would protect the institution. And Cardinal Hickey said, we told him, and he bought it, that he was a pastor, not a risk manager. And I would point out to you, I'm a great advocate of lay leaders in the church. The lawyers, the diocesan lawyers, the therapists who said they could fix these guys and return them to ministry, most of them were lay. And they were focused more on Father than they were on the abuse. So we need more lay people in the room, but they have to be independent, and they have to be focused on the victims, not the perpetrators. I worked for Cardinal Law at the conference. I was a respectful, loyal staff member. I was also a parent of teenage children during the scandals in Boston. And you can imagine the conversations we had. And at one point he said, "No one talks to me the way you do." And I said, "That's a problem." I think, as Bob has suggested, our leaders, many of our leaders are isolated. And they're surrounded by people who reinforce their judgments. And that leads to a lack of connection, a lack of anguish, a lack of action. I had the same experience as Bob had with Cardinal McCarrick, a dear friend. I stood at that podium and saluted his leadership. As a father, a friend, an ally of Cardinal McCarrick, I'm appalled and shamed and devastated. Years ago, I saw, and this goes to the rumors question, Bob. Years ago, I saw these attacks on the Cardinal and the rumors, and I asked him directly, could this be true? How can this be? He looked me right in the eye, and he said, if that were true, I would not be here. He said, that's been investigated by all the newspapers. If that were true, I would not be here. And I believe that because it was inconceivable to me that he could be Archbishop of Washington and a cardinal, if those charges were true. So the hard lesson I learned was we need an independent, credible, effective way to report on the behavior and the actions of bishops where they'll be held accountable.
You know, one thing you said that I really want to underscore, the immediate reaction of the bishops is not that there is someone hurt and needing of help, but how can I protect the money of the church? And they did act like insurance risk assessment people. And the lawyers, I mean, I'm a lawyer. I mean, I thought some of these diocesan lawyers were awful. We came across one case where there was a 6-year-old little girl who had been molested. And the immediate reaction of the diocesan lawyer in the pleading was to say she was contributorily negligent. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. But their immediate reaction was that, not that there's somebody out there hurting. And another point I would make is one thing you can do is not take no for an answer. You got to be very persistent. Let me give you an example. We decided on the board that we had to talk to a couple of the cardinals in Rome. So little Bobby Bennett plays by the rules, and I get in touch. I'm told the way to do it is you get in touch with the nuncio, and you say, would you please arrange? And so that's what I did. And of course, the nuncio would never call you back, but some delegate of his called me back and said, the nuncio feels that this is an issue outside his jurisdiction. And I said, excuse me, the molestation of children is outside his jurisdiction. Mr. Bennett, that's what I have been told to say. So what I did, this is before all this email stuff, I sent faxes to a whole bunch of cardinals, including Pope Benedict. Not before he was Pope Benedict, but 8 months before he was Cardinal Ratzinger. And boy, they called me on the carpet. Somebody called the bishop, and you can't send faxes to cardinals. I mean, you know. And I said, well, let me tell you something. Not only did I, but Cardinal Ratzinger sent me a fax back and invited me over to see him. So we went over to see him, and spent several hours with him. And it was evident, all three of us felt, that the meeting went so long because Cardinal Ratzinger felt his own bishops were lying to him about the nature and extent of the crisis.
You talked about a nuncio. I had an experience with the nuncio, Archbishop Vigano, who's been in the news. And I saw him about the work of the initiative, and I took the opportunity to say, I'm from Minnesota, and I'm in touch with leaders in Minnesota, and Archbishop Nienstedt needs to be removed because of the broken trust, because of his own conduct, and because of the failure to protect children. And he looked at me and said, we can't give in to the enemies of the church, the lawyers and the media. And what I learned there is this institutional preservation that Bob talked about, that Karen talked about, is incredibly destructive. And candidly, I also learned beware of those who would use the suffering of victims and survivors for their own ideological agendas and to take on the Holy Father or to advance their own causes. I have a couple other things to add, maybe we'll do in the question period. The final thing I learned, and this is more personal, and frankly, Kevin is the reason, one of the reasons I'm doing this. I have been talking to a lot of journalists and others about this, and I heard myself saying that silence was a big part of this problem, part of these horrors. And then I had to realize that my own silence about my own story of clerical sexual abuse was part of the problem. I went to a high school seminary. I got a great education. I got wonderful formation, and I also experienced abuse and harassment. And I didn't tell my wife. I didn't tell my parents. I haven't told my children. I didn't endure what Kevin endured. I did not endure what is in the report. But that was a part of that place, and that was a part of my life. And it occurred to me that my silence probably may have contributed to the abuse of others. So the lesson I drew from that was that silence is not an option for any of us. And that is what tonight is about, is the end of the silence. Whether you're a victim, whether you're the person in the second pew, whether you're somebody who's worked on this, whether you're a theologian, but also for you. And we would invite you to come forward and end your silence and ask us a couple questions, one to a person, and see if we can't find a way towards action. So the microphone is in the middle here. If you could line up there. I will repeat what I always repeat, which is please put your question in the form of a question.
Hi, my name is Bill Seiler, St. Mary Sorrows Parish in Fairfax, Virginia. And my question is, we have a call to action on we, the people of God, are supposed to raise our voices in objection and propose what? So I have prepared a list of 12 key elements that I'd like to read briefly, and why they would not be a part of any proposal that's put forward. Unless we, the people, somebody has to coordinate this. Who's going to coordinate it? And who's going to put the proposal together that it gets up there? Otherwise, we're all complaining, yeah, we got to do something, but what? And if I could just read these.
I'm going to ask you to read 2 or 3 instead of 10. Okay,
well, the main one would be, we got because I read the National Review Board's proposal to expand its charter to include bishops, and I would also include adults in that as a part of their responsibility, and that the U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops expand the National Review Board's charter to give them responsibility for receiving impartial investigation of the hierarchy, sexual abuse allegations, and abuse of power, which Pope Francis is against, that occur when the clergy's sexual abuse is known and concealed.
Sure.
And then the more controversial would be to have an immediate plenary requirement for each diocese to disclose all diocese records related to clergy sex abuse retroactive to 1950, which is happening, for example, in our Arlington diocese. We were notified that the bishop has now set up a committee. Little Rock did it, so that there are others. But anyhow, who?
Thank you.
Who can put this together, and what kind of group or committee or whatever should be prepared, be assembled to do this?
Sure. Can we do this 2 by 2? Because there's a number of people at the microphone. If you could come forward with your question, and then we'll ask the panel. It's very biblical, this 2 by 2 business.
My question has to do with something that has not been mentioned yet this evening, but I think it fits somewhere. I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know how it fits. But it seems to me that the statutes of limitation are in most states are really for children who were abused as minors. They often can't talk about it. John, maybe what you're talking about was partly that too. I know, but for me, I was sexually abused in a small parish in the Midwest by my priest, and it went on from the age of 7 to 10, and I'm 80 now, and I've never told anyone about it until very recently. I've never spoken about it. Anyway,
Okay.
I found out. I'm in therapy now, and I found out from my therapist that, in her opinion, I should be doing something public, but
Karen has been outspoken on the need for the external controls and accountability. Do you want to add to that? And Bob, maybe you could comment on the review board question.
And in fact, just today in Pennsylvania, because that was one of the things the grand jury recommended as well. I think their statute of limitations is stops at age 30. The House up there did pass 173 to 21 today, a bill that would extend the statute of limitations, but it may not go through the Senate. It's got a real, so I think this is something where, churches are churches and their insurance companies are incredibly powerful in state capitals. And I think people need to be watching this like hawks and, letting the church leadership know that we're just not going to tolerate pushing back against these badly, badly needed reforms.
One of the things you should know that everyone on the National Review Board was so outraged by what's happening that Justice Burke wrote the Bishops' Conference, and we volunteered our services again to do further investigation on such issues as how you can get so high in the church when this stuff's going on. And we didn't charge the church for anything. My law firm, which was really run by a number of Jewish partners, wrote off $2 million of time. I mean, that's kind of amazing. And, you take one of those pictures down in the Vatican vaults, it would have paid for that, but that wasn't in the cards. And what we got back, it was signed by Justice Burke, and we didn't even get a signed letter back that somebody said, thank you, we've received your letter, and it wasn't even signed. So it was another back of the hand to Justice Burke. So here we were all willing to commit a couple more years of work, and they just, they didn't care.
Clearly, though, including bishops in the charter is necessary, and having lay people at the center of this is required. Can we ask the next two people to come forward? I hope you can see us really well because of those lights, because we can't see you.
We can see you fine. Hello, I'm Mary Pat Fox. I'm president of Voice of the Faithful, which is a Catholic lay organization that started in 2002 with the abuse crisis. My question for you is, do you have any suggestions on how we can get lay involvement in the meeting in February in Rome that the Pope has called for all of the bishops?
Okay, good question. Next.
Hi, my name is Richie Mullaney. I graduated from Georgetown in May, and I just recently started working in the Office of Advancement here at Georgetown. Thank you for being here. About 50 years ago, after Vatican II, the president of Georgetown signed the Land O'Lakes Statement, and in it, it said that Catholic universities should act as critical, reflective intelligences of the church. My question for you as a recent graduate of a Catholic university and a new employee of a Catholic university sitting here at the first and oldest Catholic college in the United States is, what is our role here? What can Georgetown do? What can Catholic universities do to help this problem?
Yeah. Let's do one more and then we'll go to the panel. Come forward.
Hi, my name is Ana Ruiz. I'm a freshman here. I just started this fall. I'm in the SFS, and I just wanted to say thank you, all of you, for sharing your experiences, because I feel that on this topic, every single perspective is important. And my question is a bit more positive, going off of his. How do we bridge the trust in the church leadership, the leadership that has good intentions, and how do we just build that trust with the church as well?
Okay. So trust, the February meeting, and what's the role of a university? Who wants to take it?
Well, I would ask how many classes your university teaches on sexual violence and abuse. That would be a good start. And if you don't have any, you should. That's what I would suggest for you.
Yeah.
I would say that according to the Second Vatican Council, the lay people have quite a bit of latitude to engage in apostolate on their own without having to send everything to their bishop or their pastor for review. Now, if you're going to call yourself a Catholic organization, that's where the hierarchy, gets to decide, does this organization merit the name Catholic? But students don't have to wait for the bishop or even for faculty to form an independent student group, and then that group can decide what its goals are and whom it's going to send to seek dialogue with people in power.
Two quick comments. One is, this is an example, frankly, of a Catholic university trying to take that challenge seriously. And it's for us just a beginning, not an end. How many, is this your first dialogue from the initiative on Catholic social law? Thank you, welcome. How many have been here so many times they know my jokes? This is just the beginning for us. We just had a session a week ago with young leaders in Washington, so you can look to us. The one sign of hope, and I don't have tremendous sign of hope, one of the things that's happening is Pope Francis is listening more to victims and survivors, and I think we should challenge him to make sure that survivors are a part of the February meeting. So come forward.
I am Jose Casanova. I'm a professor here at Georgetown, and I have a very simple proposal, one which Archbishop Wickland from Milwaukee made a long time ago in an op-ed page in the New York Times. You say there are good theological reasons why we cannot ordain women, but there are no theological reasons why we cannot make women cardinals, because laity can be cardinals. So let's at least make sure that half of the College of Cardinals is for clerics, and the other half of the College of Cardinals is made up of religious sisters that have a lot to say in the church, of female laity, and of male laity. Until we don't do that, what Mr. Bennett has said, until we don't show that the clerics are willing to give up power, there will be nothing. Nothing will happen.
I think we have two nominees here. Kim might be available. Come forward.
Good evening, and thank you so much for all your contributions. I have two quick questions. One is, for those of us who know the work of Cardinal McCarrick, beyond the recent revelations around, for instance, interreligious dialogue and many other very good deeds that he's done over his career. How do we reconcile, if at all, how do we reconcile, if at all, what he's done in his position to advance interreligious dialogue and the recent revelations that also have sort of happened throughout his life and career as a cardinal? And then my other comment is sort of an answer to the question, why am I still a Catholic? Why am I still a Christian? I think all of us, in a sense, are carry a message that comes from scriptures, that comes from a place that has never intended even remotely to encourage these types of behaviors. And I think that personally, that's what sort of I go back to when these things happen, because ultimately humans fail miserably, as we have seen, but scriptures and wisdom, ancient wisdom, tries to stay with us and teach us something that wants to go beyond. Ultimately, I just want to sort of reiterate that I completely agree with some of the suggestions that have been offered about, by Mr. Robert Bennett on how to solve these issues. Thank you.
Okay. One more, and then we'll go to the panel on...
Hi, my name is Emily Yanazelli. Thank you very much for all of your wisdom that you've shared. I graduated from Georgetown in 2011, and I currently produce a podcast. I don't have a book, but I have a podcast. It's called This is Catholic, and I've been sort of exploring the question of what it means for me to be Catholic by talking to people who are living out their faith in really interesting and inspiring, but also unorthodox ways. I've interviewed groups of Roman Catholic women priests and authors that aren't completely in line with the hierarchical doctrine, but that are really inspiring. And I think one thing I've learned is that instead of Catholic as in universal, meaning uniform, like we're all the same, it's for me come to mean like that which binds all of the diversity together. And so I think it's awesome that we're here talking about like lay involvement and lay people, but like in reading about Cardinal McCarrick, who confirmed me, it made me really mad thinking about that the worst punishment that he could get from the church was to be laicized, right? To be made into a layperson, which is the only thing that I ever had the choice of being. Even if I were to become a nun, even if I were to become a nun, nuns don't get the sacrament of holy orders. And so I don't know like what the technical definition of layperson is, but I guess I want there to be lay involvement, but I'm wondering like why this isn't a question of full empowerment and inclusion of women in the church first.
Sure.
I really appreciate both of the past questions with respect to women's involvement in the church. Now, I will admit that I'm in the minority in this room, it seems, and perhaps on this panel as well, in that I do believe and hold firmly, because it is a teaching of the church, that the church cannot change its teaching on the ordination of women. That's been very clear in the documents of the church. But one thing that I do believe is that the whole issue of the ordination of women really takes a lot of, it divides people, it divides women between, liberal and traditional and that sort of thing. I'm not a fan of those divisions, and it takes a lot of energy away from the discussion that we should be having about the power of lay people in the church. I mean, just the fact that we're even thinking, oh, well, if women were cardinals, this is crazy. I mean, with all due respect, Father Provincial, honestly, I should not have to wear a collar in order to get heard in the church. And so I think that people who hold to the church's traditional and I would say permanent teaching with respect to the non-ordination of women and people who would personally like to see women ordained. I think it would be great if we could just put this ordination issue aside and really come together on how can women and lay people in general have more power. That's something I'd be willing to talk about and contribute to and listen.
Bob, you talked about your friendship with Cardinal McCarrick. I talked a little bit about it. He was in your book. What about the question of, this is a man who did a lot of good and also, at least in surprise to me, did a lot of evil. How do you pull that together?
I can't pull it together. I mean, you know, I wish I had an answer. I don't know what the answer is. And on your point, the women, see, I think the church would be better with women in it. It's not, that's the reason. That's the reason. Can you imagine a woman priest?
Well, we're used to working for low pay.
That's true.
Long hours.
Well, look at the history of nuns in this country, the way they've been treated by the male church. It's outrageous. But the point I'm making is, if you had a woman priest in a parish and some male bishop wanted to transfer some pedophile to another jurisdiction on the theory of geographical cure, I believe most women would say, "Are you out of your mind?"
John.
Frankly, one would hope most human beings would do that, but
Can I just say
Kevin?
I don't want to get into the politics as a mayor as a victim. A couple of points. If only sexual predators were all conservative theologists, this would be easy. One can be politically progressive and outwardly kind to all sorts of people and still be a sexual predator. That's the really scary aspect of it. The other thing that I think is, I don't want to get political, but I think that as long as an institution denigrates women as less than equal to the men, there can't be a perspective that allows that voice and that kind of. I will just say this as a generality. I do not see a lot of scandals where women are abusing children. I just don't. And so if they're in the church and they're in positions of authority, I somehow feel like Mr. Bennett does, that less will happen, and that's what I feel.
I appreciate your point, but I have one word for you. Ireland, the Magdalene laundries. I mean, that's a huge nationwide scandal of women abusing.
Here's where we are. We have a lot of people lined up, and we're nearing the end of our time. Most of the questions are more comments than questions. What I'd like to do is invite everyone who's in line now to just take, 30 seconds, a minute at most, to share your concern or your question. Then we'll go to our panel one last time, and then we'll thank everyone for coming.
Hi, so my name's Justin, and I'm a freshman in the college. I'll keep this really short. Is the corruption of the church primarily a problem of morality, economics, or politics? Essentially, what I'm asking is, what is the cause for our moral catastrophe? Briefly, how's the church fundamentally broken?
Okay. Next.
So my name in this is irrelevant, but I first of all, before my question, wanted to say, for all those who have come forward, for all those who have been hurt, for all those who know someone who's been hurt, and for all those who are suffering in silence, I want to extend to you my deepest sorrow, but my deepest gratitude for your strength. My question is, my mother has worked for the Catholic Diocese of a place in the center of New York. I'm not going to say due to protect her. And she's witnessed and bear witness to not only abuse, but administrative abuse and other abuses that are causing very much of a problem in her life. My question is, how does someone who works for a diocese, who sees what's going on, but who is silent out of fear because she has come forward, or who's seen other people have been fired for coming forward? What helps those lay people who are lay people who work and their life's work is the church? What can they do?
Thank you.
Hi, I'm a Maronite Catholic, and I want to ask, what about the Eastern Catholic churches? Have there been credible accusations against clerics of the Eastern Catholic churches? Should the Eastern Catholic churches be included in these investigations run by the states? And is there a legal basis for that? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bill Kunzik. I'm a retired corporate lawyer and lifelong Catholic, and I'd like to ask particularly Bob and Kevin this question. In your opinion, does the RICO Act, Racketeering Influenced Corrupt Organizations Act, apply to the leadership of the Catholic Church? And if it does, should we as Catholics support and advocate for the civil authorities to use that against those people?
Okay.
Hey y'all, my name is Nick, and I'm an alumnus of Wheeling Jesuit University. I am currently a seminarian, and so my question is for Dr. Don and Mr. Kevin. What do we do? How can we be the solution? And I would like to hear specifically from you two, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jack Person. I will keep this short, but I will take a little bit of a devil's advocate aspect to it. How can the church, I'll be honest with you, how can the church protect its assets? People are using this to cripple the church's ability to work in society and also its own churches. A number of dioceses have been bankrupted. I understand that absolutely completely. But I do think there's an element of the people, and I'm just taking devil's advocate. There is an element of trying to cripple the church and cripple the donations that all the lay people have made over the years in these settlements. Now, there may be some answers, like we can give X number of dollars and the church will not be bankrupted. But I do think there's an element of the people who are using litigation against these evil people to try to pull down all our institutions through monetary compensation. This is just a devil's advocate side of it, but I appreciate your consideration.
It's more than a devil's advocate position. Okay, last three.
Hi, what can an ordinary Catholic person do? Hi, can we begin a nationwide platform that would work to counsel and to work in parallel with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, a lay and religious-led independent organization so that we can gather and be heard together and have some influence, just to be able to do something. Thank you.
All right. And last but not least.
I'm sorry for sneaking up to the mic late, but I'm kind of nervous. So I'm only in town actually for a couple more days, just by chance I was able to make it to this panel tonight. I am active duty Army in town for training to be an inspector general. So circumstances being what they are, it's just very coincidental, I guess. So I'm being trained right now to be that impartial fact finder, to do inspections, to find out what the systemic problems are, what are the root causes for those, and what are the recommendations to fix it.
That's a wrap.
How might this apply to being in the church is that I think with Vatican II giving so much latitude to the laity to work in the church, at that time though, in society, I don't think anybody really knew how to do that. So how can we develop programs, checks and balances with laity and clergy, and teach, and include the Catholic social teachings? I don't think a lot of people really understand how to read through the catechism and understand the why behind everything. So if there's a way that we can put some subject matter experts together and try to build that panel and do that checks and balances, I think that might help.
Can I ask the panel, you have quite a menu to choose from. There's a couple questions for lawyers. There's a question for a seminary professor. There's a lot about how lay people could work together. Eastern Catholic Church, is this a problem of morality, politics, or economics? Yes.
Actually, though, I think it's power.
Okay. Say more about that. That's my word.
I think that and it's that the power is so often when you see institutions shaken by scandal, it ultimately comes down to somebody has power and they don't want to give it up and they want to protect it. And that, I think, is totally what's going on here, getting back to Bob's point about this really being about the bishops.
Bob, comment on one of these or a story?
Pardon me?
A comment about one of these or a story?
Or a story?
Yeah.
Can I tell a funny story?
Well,
because this is pretty heavy stuff.
Well, when we invited you here, we thought you were perfect because you know scandal. I mean,
I sure do.
Go ahead. We could use.
Well,
let me ask the others, and then we'll go to the funny story. Seminaries, and then take your choice, Kevin.
Okay, thank you. I will answer the seminary question, but just a quick response to the question of power. I earlier today spoke at a private conference. I spoke via Skype of a group of professionals from what, for a lack of a better word, one would call the conservative, faction of the church. It's a shame that we're in all these factions. And this was a conference specifically about homosexuality and the abuse crisis. And the aim of this conference was to make homosexuality and getting gays out of the priesthood the sort of key that fits all locks to fixing this. So I just spent 15 minutes today trying to tell all these people via Skype that we should not be focusing on one key that fits all locks, that there's also the problem of clericalism, the problem of power, and that victims deserve our looking at all the possible causes of this crisis and not just zeroing in on one and saying if we just fix this we're fine. So now I stand here just wanting to say the same thing. But with respect to seminarians, I really appreciated the question from the seminarian, and I would say as far as what you can do as a seminarian is you can take in the pain of the victims and the pain and the suffering of the church because of priests who betrayed their sacred calling, and you can use that exposure to that pain to root you more deeply in your sacred calling to have a shepherd's heart. Root yourself. We're here at a Jesuit university. St. Ignatius of Loyola promoted a devotion to the Sacred Heart. That's how the Jesuits managed to beat the Jansenists, through Sacred Heart devotion. So as a seminarian, you're preparing for this sacrament of orders that conforms you in a unique way to Christ the priest. Well, Christ's authority comes from his union with the Father, and that is a union of love. Christ is the Good Shepherd, so I recommend meditating on that.
I'm glad you brought up, we can't run away from the homosexual issue. So, I have to pick my words carefully. I agree with you that we should not use this crisis as a way of purging those priests who have a homosexual inclination. There are no good statistics, but we on the board kind of pretty much generally concluded after many interviews that there's anywhere between 30% to 55% of priests have a homosexual inclination. There's many wonderful priests who have a homosexual inclination that would never act on it. But in years past, there was no screening. People, very dysfunctional men, would go into the priesthood because A, they never had to explain why they weren't married, and B, a very prominent homosexual activist told me. He said, Bob, if we went in and we got into trouble, we knew the priesthood would protect us. Not report us, but protect us.
We're off on a thing that requires a lot more attention than we're able to give it at this time.
Well, it's the elephant in the room, though, isn't it?
There are several elephants. Kevin, Kevin, we began with you. Let's finish with you.
The questions, as I heard them, range from whether the church should be treated as a racketeering institute to someone being the devil's advocate, to most of you asking, what should you do? And I just have a couple of thoughts, and I want to distinguish between adult men who have sex with one another and any adult who has sex with a child. When you're a child and you are sexualized early, before your consent can be formed and before you know what's going on, that is the criminal act. I don't give a crap what your sexuality is as to who you like. If you are attracted to and rape children, that is wrong, and that is what the church has to deal with foremost and first. The second point is do I think that the church should pay compensation? I don't know. I've always thought it would be a much better solution if every victim had free access to medical care by a Catholic hospital. But that's beyond my pay grade to answer. What I do know is somebody asked me, how do we get out of this trap if we're people of faith? I think that the way for me, ironically speaking, is to look at Christ's message himself and to distinguish the faith of Catholicism from the institution of the Catholic Church. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with the message from a man who says that the blessed among us are the weak, the poor, and the misbegotten, not the wealthy and well-heeled. And maybe that's the message that the church has forgotten. Any institution, and as a litigator, I sue the United States government, I sue big entities. They all ask the same way. Institutions begin to protect their institutional interests. And I'll finish with this. I know that the compensation issue has bankrupted many archdioceses, but let me say this as a victim. You committed heinous crimes of a huge magnitude that you covered up for years. You told us we were lying. You told us that our perception of reality was wrong. And you know what? Maybe, given that, I'm not sure you should survive as an institution with money.
Well, it's been quite a night. Beginning and ending with Kevin and a powerful witness. A call for reform, a focus on power and women, and a focus on prayer and seminaries. I think we have pieces here. I will tell you our initiative is absolutely committed to following through on this conversation. Part of the casualties, you can't say victims, but among the casualties, among the costs of this crisis are that the voice of the church for immigrants, for the poor, for the vulnerable, for peace, is being undermined and losing credibility and impact. And that means people like us are going to have to step up. We're going to have to step up to reform the church, not to save the church as an institution, but to proclaim the gospel, to serve the least of these, and to build the kingdom. And we're going to have to find a way to do that as lay men and women committed to the gospel. We have a particular role. We ought to seize it. Our initiative will help. Please join me in thanking this wonderful panel.